Hi, good.
Now we have recorded about 2 years ago a longer interview in your office, so this is a continuation of this previous conversation. And I wanted to ask you about your beginnings. You were trained as a physicist, and I was wondering what was your epiphany and how, or revelation, how you came into ecology, how this interest or urgency started.
Well, more than one, because it keeps
It's a chain.
constantly a chain. But the first really was the deforestation in the Himalaya. And I'd grown up in the forests of the Himalaya. My father was a forest conservator. And I did a trek to my favorite areas. The forests were gone. But during that time, I heard about this movement that women had started, which later got the name CHIPCO, which means to hug. This was in the early 70s. And what CHIPCO did for me was connect ecology to social justice. I think ecological awareness was very much part of my growing up. But the fact that nature was important to the poor, totally opposite of the narrative that it's only when you get rich, the story is you've got to have growth before you think of environmental protection. It wasn't true and isn't true even today. And the next step was 84, when we had the Punjab disaster, first the extremism, then the invasion into the Golden Temple. We had the tragedy of Bhopal. And by the end of the year, I was saying to myself, why is agriculture like war? 30,000 people were killed in the Punjab violence. 3,000 people were killed on that night of 2nd December, and 30,000 have died in Bhopal since then. And as a physicist, as a scientist, I can't live with unexplained puzzles, I've got to solve them. And I just decided to look at what was happening with agriculture, what was the Green Revolution, and wrote a book at the end of it called The Violence of the Green Revolution, where I learned that agriculture was like war because it had come from war. Its roots were the war in industry. The pesticides came from chemical warfare. Even the fertilizers came from the explosives industry, which is why you can remake bombs out of fertilizers. Most of Afghanistan is blowing up with fertilizer bombs, which the US government distributed to counter the Soviets. And today that's what's being used in a huge way. Because of that work, I started to get invited to agriculture meetings, and I would go out of pure inquisitiveness. What are they going to do next? And in 1987, I happened to be invited to a meeting on biotechnology in Geneva, where the big industry was laying out its plans of having genetically modified seeds, having patenting of life forms, and having a trade treaty called the GATT, then, which became the WTO, to impose this structure on the world. And to me, it sounded like dictatorship. So I said, got to do something about this to keep freedom alive, to keep democracy alive. And I started to save seeds, inspired very much by Gandhi's spinning wheel, something small that can multiply enough to make a big difference.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask you, because obviously in our last conversation you said Gandhi was your great inspiration. We spoke about two great inspirations to kind of counter that idea of agriculture, of war, and the non-violence of Gandhi, and you said that the whole seed idea, that epiphany came out of you being influenced by Gandhi. But we also spoke about our friend Arne Naess, who very sadly died since then, so maybe we can dedicate this conversation to his memories. I was curious
very
if you could
much,
tell
a
us
dear
about
friend.
a very important founder of deep ecology.
Yeah.
If you could tell us about Gandhi and Arne Naess as kind of two influences on you.
Well, both celebrated non-violence at the deepest level. And for both, non-violent economies had to be economies based on the lightest footprint. And Arne Naess's idea about a deep ecology, in a way, was the same as Gandhi's idea of living peaceably on the planet, leaving resources for everyone else, not thinking it's all for one species and some people from one species. So it wasn't just anthropomorphism they were fighting. They were also fighting the injustice of the access to and utilization of resources. But the deep ecology idea was basically the old Indian idea of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, the idea that we are part of one large earth family, And this tree isn't there just to give shade. To us, it's for all the birds, all the pollinators, all the beings that are supported by it. And that idea of a deeper ecology which changes our consciousness from being masters of the universe to being one in a web of life. Your entire idea of politics changes according to that, because then deep democracy is an outflow of deep ecology. And I would say a deep sustainable economy is an outflow. And you would measure the growth very differently. You'd measure growth in terms of how much biodiversity is flourishing, how much food your children are getting, how many pollinators are there. The collapse of 70% bees on the planet would be a wake-up call for humanity. You wouldn't measure growth in terms of how much transaction takes place. You sell me your pen and I sell you my pen, and we've got twice the growth with the same 2 pens.
And that obviously leads us straight away to your other epiphany, which we discussed last time at length, which is the Navdanya, your invention of Navdanya. And that has to do, I mean, you already mentioned the seeds, and last time you told me seeds are spinning, how, I don't remember.
Seeds and the spinning wheels.
Yeah, which I thought was very beautiful. And so I was curious if we could talk a little bit more about seeds and this sort of invention of Navdanya as a structure, as a platform, as an agency.
Sure. Well, you know, seed, I definitely know what it means very clearly in Sanskrit and Hindi. Bija means that from which life arises. But what's happening to the seed is life is being taken out of it as it's being commodified and patented. And it's being genetically engineered, in fact, to be terminated, to be sterile so that farmers can't save seed. But even the genetically engineered BT cotton that's being sold in India can't be saved. Its cost is 4,000 rupees per year compared to 5 rupees that farmers would pay for purchase seed. And not only is it not controlling pests, it's actually creating new pests. I've just come back from Vidarbha, where the suicides are very high. The cotton fields look red because there's a new disease called lalia, which means the reddening of the plant. So we're seeing a disappearance of seed on a very, very large scale. We had 1,500 varieties of cotton, green cottons and blue cottons and pink cottons and short staple and long staple and drought-resistant cotton. We now have only one cotton, the BT cotton, controlled by one company, Monsanto, my favorite company, Ulrich, as you know. So, you know, way back, I didn't realize the tragedy would be as big as it has become. I did know if seed was controlled, agriculture would be controlled. Biodiversity would be destroyed. That's the lesson I'd learned from Punjab, a land of monocultures of rice and wheat, with all biodiversity gone. So saving seeds became kind of the answer to deal with the closure of patenting, genetic modification, and the so-called free trade, which is unfree in every way. But how do you talk about it? You know, at that time, 1987, when I started this, the language used to be genetic resources. There was no language of biodiversity which came up with the Biodiversity Convention, which would have been very easy to translate into Hindi as Jaiva Vividhata. But genetic resources are atoms of the plant. My God, if you start talking about the atoms of the plant to a farmer, he'll say every reason to not save it, you know. And while doing seed collection, I'd gone to an area where the seeds hadn't been destroyed because that area was controlled by the sandalwood pirate, Virappan, the big mooch. He used to hold all of Karnataka to ransom off and on, kidnap a few film stars. But his area, nobody could go. The agriculture people couldn't go, so they hadn't spread chemical farming. And the old seeds were still there. And the tribal farmer had a field with 9 crops. And by then I was counting biodiversity all the time. I said, wow, you got 9 crops. And he said, Navdanya. I said, you're saying it so casually. What's the significance of 9? He gave me one big discourse on the 9 planets, the cosmic harmony, the harmony in the field, and the harmony in your body. And I said, this is it, Navdanya. That's what we'll call our movement.
Now, one thing which I was very impressed by also when I visited you last time is that there is a sort of a permanent production of manifestos. You publish these little manifestos non-stop. There are many, many manifestos. I was wondering if you can tell us about these manifestos and what is your most recent manifestos. And then in relation to that, I was wondering, I mean, given the urgency of the issues you describe, I mean, last time we discussed Fukuoka Masanobu, another pioneer,
yes.
and we do bring up these pioneers in the marathon because the marathons are very much following Eric Hobsbawm's idea of a protest against forgetting, so to remember pioneers from previous decades. And Masanobu wrote the One Straw Revolution. So I was curious if you could talk about your manifestos and this idea of maybe a revolution.
Sure. Well, one reason we use the term manifesto for this synthesis of ideas of our time is because they want to make manifesto look like a dirty word. I started to use the word feminist when they would make Times cover stories that feminism is dead. And then I said, no, it's very much alive. The same with manifesto. So we decided in a very naughty way to call these extremely serious documents manifestos. And they come out of an international commission on the future of food and agriculture that I chair, that's located in the region of Tuscany and hosted by the government of Tuscany in Italy. First one was on food, what will be the future of food? The next was on seed. We realized that you can't deal with food if you don't deal with the first link in the food chain. The third was on the links between climate change and the kind of models of food systems you have, because industrial farming and globalized trade in food is contributing 40% of the greenhouse gases. So shifting to ecological farming systems and more localized supply is a 40% solution. Here they are killing the entire United Nations Framework Convention Treaty in Copenhagen and Cancun over a 5% reluctance. And here everyone could be solving the problem. And we worked that out in the manifesto. Our latest manifesto, very interesting manifesto, because we realized the real issue is paradigms. What knowledge systems do we have? And we wrote it at the time where the financial economy was collapsing, the food systems were in crisis with the food price rise. There was crisis after crisis. And we wrote it to an artistic message, because I think it's so vital. On Fukuoka, I'd just like to say, he wrote this book, The One Straw Revolution. And part of what the Green Revolution did was destroy the straw. There's no straw in Green Revolution crops. Short, dwarf varieties with just grain that go to the marketplace and rot in our go-downs while people starve. Fukuoka came and gave a talk for us at our annual lectures, just behind here, at the India International Center, when he was 93 years old. People didn't believe he was still alive. But not only was he alive then, we've lost him now, but he was alive then. But we had such a huge turnout that the lecture had to be shifted from the auditorium of IISc to the lawns of IISc. So, there are these amazing people who leave a legacy. And what legacy do they leave? They're basically telling you, walk lightly, don't be greedy, have a rich life, rich not in terms of your bank accounts, but rich in terms of your life experience.
Now, last time when I visited you, we looked at these manifestos, and it's actually astonishing because they are self-published by you in a very similar way to Jonah Friedman's, many little sort of manifesto-type books which he has published, which he calls Concrete Utopias, the visionary urbanist who is now in his mid-80s. And then, I was thinking, coming back and interviewing you for a second time, that we should talk about Concrete Utopia, projects of yours which are utopic but realizable and have maybe not yet been realized. And last time we met, you felt the most urgent project is interlinking the rivers somehow, or resisting that. I mean, it had all to do with rivers. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about this river project and about other sort of concrete projects on a larger scale which maybe have not yet been realized.
Well, I mean, in terms of the utopias that have been realized, when the suicides became very intense in 4 states in India, especially Maharashtra, which is the land of cotton, we started a Seeds of Hope campaign there and started to save seeds. And with such odds against odds, because everything had become BT cotton. I've just come back from Vidarbha, and tiny amounts of seeds we had saved are now covering acres and acres of land with organic cotton. Tur, the dal that makes very nice rasam and sambar if you've eaten South Indian food. Some of the best artwork in cooking is the rasam and the sambar. Well, the tur is disappearing. We now import yellow dal from America, which is not a tur, and then they sell, because the prices of dal went so high last year, 150 rupees, they started selling an eye dal. It was called an eye dal. Now, I can't figure out why they call a dal eye, except that they got inspired with Apple. You know, they have an iPod, they have an iPad, so they now have an eye dal, which is not a dal at all. It's soya powder shaped into a dal and dyed yellow. And I was so thrilled to see our farmers who are working as seed savers. They've saved 20 varieties of tur dal, which we'll now carefully multiply, and we will carefully grow and cultivate. And that's the kind of thing that keeps me going. You know, just stretching myself every limit. We had won the river linking issue. It was considered a bad idea. Even the Environment Minister Jairam Ramesh a few weeks ago had said, it's a bad idea. He's just starting to say it's a good idea, wanting to build the first river linking, which is the Kale linking to the Betwa River, building a dam in the heart of the Panna Tiger Reserve, while our tigers are anyway going extinct. Now this flip-flop that happens with political decision making is really connected to my unfulfilled utopia. To this, today. When I started to promote organic farming, I realized it was a solution to farmers' suicides. It was a solution to the ecological crisis. 70% water comes out, is wasted in agriculture. All the chemical in our food, the loss of biodiversity. And bit by bit, Kerala has announced an organic policy. My state, Uttarakhand, has an organic policy. Navdanya is helping the Kingdom of Bhutan, an entire country, to go organic. I've been trying. I've been an experts group of the government in Delhi, and my unfulfilled utopia is the wall that the government here has built around itself. You can have a scam and nothing happens. 2G wasn't a scam. No, there was no money loss. People continue to die of hunger. The NAC tries to put a Food Security Act, and the government says they can't afford it. They can afford 1.3 trillion rupees of subsidies to chemical fertilizers, more than the defense budget, but they can't afford 20 crores for getting food to the hungry. And I think my unfulfilled utopia is the next breakthrough in the democratic energies of the Indian people to break down the immunity of a highly corrupt, highly undemocratic, highly iniquity-creating system of governance that today Delhi has become.
One very last question. It's the Rux question, because of this idea of India as a rising power, there is a peculiar combination of innocence and arrogance that can threaten our sanity. What are the resources that we can use to maintain a critical sense so that the footprint of this rising power is not a disastrous one? So that may be linking. I was also very curious what would be your advice to a young activist or artist in 2011?
I don't give advice, but my invitation would be, come and see the real India. Live in the real India, which creates the wealth that the others either loot or destroy. I think artists should do some kind of a fun art show on the Mukesh Ambani hideous structure in Bombay. It's a violation to aesthetics. It's of course a violation to justice, but it's a violation to aesthetics. It's so ugly. It takes an effort to be that ugly. And I think, the idea of India as a rising power was a very convenient mythology created by the part of India that wanted to loot the rest of India, whether it was in in Chhattisgarh were to rob the mineral resources, they've actually, and undermine the constitutional rights of tribals in the laws like the Panchayati Raj Extension to Scheduled Areas Act called PESA, or the Tribal Rights, Forest Rights Act. The tribals are acting according to their constitutional rights. But if they act according to their constitutional rights, you can't have a mine. You can't have a factory. So what do? First, they create private militias like Central America called Salvajudum. When human rights activists report on the violations of rights by Salvajudum, they throw people like Dr. Binayak Sen, a dear friend, a dear colleague, into jail for life imprisonment. That's the shining India and rising India, where the voice of those who serve the poor, the voice of those who defend the Indian Constitution, the voice of those who stand for what this country really is, has to be silenced. So a false India, that's not India, can rule for a very short time, because you cannot build an empire on ruins, ecological ruins, social ruins, constitutional and democratic ruins. You can't.
Thank you so very, very much, Vandana. Thank you so much. Wonderful. Thank you so much.